Good morning, members. It's time and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting. Now, all the documents are included in the agenda. Can we now invite the administration to join us? May I remind members, in accordance of Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, if members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to the matter under discussion today, you have to disclose the interest in advance and its nature too. Good morning. To the government team. Ms. Tanya Chen submitted a document in relation to the boundary of port areas and passageways of the West Kowloon station of the XRL. And the administration has given response as paper number CB bracket 4731/17-18/01. Can I invite the administration to take us through the paper? Mr. Chen, right? You have sent in the plans. Can you please take us through that document? Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. In our response, we pointed out there are just a few types of passageways. Mr. Lee, Secretary for Security, mentioned that that is a passenger passageway, customs passageway, a passageway for goods and garbage. We also said that doors mostly are for a means of escape. So the response is rather detailed. I wonder if members have other questions. For the design of the West Kowloon station, in terms of operation and security, there's a special committee to consider the design, so there are many government departments involved in approving the design. So that's why there is a thorough consideration in terms of security, and so the security is watertight. I understand members have followed up on certain issues. We've received the relevant letters, so we will give a response as soon as possible later on. Thank you. Members, if you wish to ask questions, please press the button again. Who would like to ask questions, please press the button, Ms. Tanya Chen, because I didn't see you pressing the button. Dr. Fernando Zhang, 3 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would still like to go back to my question from the last meeting, because I think this is important. Here we're talking about whether this bill is in contravention with the basic law or whether it is unconstitutional. The Bar Association's position is that they do not see a legal basis for this bill. So my question has all along been that how is it not a contravention of Article 18? Article 18 says that national laws shall not be applied to Hong Kong except those included in Annex 3 to the Basic Law. And so, even so, there should be local legislation enacted to implement those national laws. So from the wordings, we can see clearly here, we are talking about applying national laws within the boundary of Hong Kong. The West Kowloon Station mainland port area lies within the boundary of Hong Kong. Therefore, national laws shall not be applied in this area. The wordings are unequivocal in that respect. Last time, the Secretary of Justice said that for the Chong Feng Yun and the Canning cases, we can say that if we want to interpret the basic law, we must go beyond the text of the basic law. We have to look at the inherent, the extrinsic materials as well as the supplementary materials to interpret the basic law. So from these various sources, it said that for Article 18.2, that's a definition of the relationship between the state and Hong Kong. And after studying the whole matter, their conclusion is that Article 18 is only about general application. In other words, if there are specific purposes, or according to the Secretary for Justice, if there are three conditions, for example, the scope covered, the persons the laws are applied to, and those implementing the laws, and if these three factors vary, then Article 18 would not be applicable. So my question is, what are the intrinsic, extrinsic, or supplemental factors, so that after you have studied Chapter 2, you could come to this conclusion based on which provisions? Please be specific. You must not muddle through.
This question has been asked and answered a number of times, both orally and in writing. Secretary, well, it doesn't detract from the fact that the question has not been answered, actually. Last time you said it's a 5, 4, 4, 4, 4 minutes. It's his fifth round. It's his fifth round. Why is it 3 minutes? You said 5, 4, 4, 4 minutes. Actually, last time you spent much more time than that. Well, that's a point of order. You said it's a 5, 4, 4, 4 minutes. And why suddenly we have 3 minutes? All right, I'll allow Dr. Zhang 4 minutes. But I have to stress again that if it's irrelevant or redundant, I would stop that. But this is not a frivolous question. We must get an answer. Secretary, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank Dr. Zhang for the question, and this gives me an opportunity to repeat what I've said last time and also in writing previously. There were 2 points. First, the legal foundation. Second, Article 18. We must separate the two issues. We look at the legal foundation first. And that is how we go about enacting this piece of legislation. As I explained when I first came to this council, first we have to set a policy which is good for Hong Kong's economy, Hong Kong's people's interests. Then this council has the power to enact the legislation so that the policy can be implemented according to law and smoothly. In the case of co-location arrangement, Mr. Frank Chang has talked about how it would benefit our people a number of times, and I don't need to repeat those arguments again. And this policy was enacted against the background of Article 118, Article 119 of Basic Law, and that is the SAR government can enact social policies. And also in doing so, we have to rely on Article 2, in that Hong Kong SAR enjoys a high degree of autonomy. And in doing this, we need to use our land. Article 7 states that the land and natural resources within the SAR shall be state property, but the Hong Kong SAR government shall be responsible for their management and use and development. And because we need to implement the co-location arrangement. There's the need to discuss with the mainland authorities, and so we have the cooperation agreement. The Basic Law allows Hong Kong SAR government to formulate policies and to reach agreements to implement the arrangement, the co-location arrangements. So this cooperation agreement is what has been reached is an administrative arrangement. So there's a need to introduce a bill into this council for the law to be enacted. So ultimately, it's up to members here to decide whether to pass this into law or not, so as to ensure that the co-location arrangement can be implemented smoothly in accordance with the law. And the legal foundation is like other government policies. That is when Hong Kong SAR governments annex labor policies. You won't find anything in the Basic Law that there is the need to enact a law on minimum wage. But the government has the power to enact or to formulate labor policies, and then we'll have to introduce a bill to this council to implement the policy. It's just a similar situation here. So that's the legal foundation. Secondly, when the law is passed into law, members here will have to consider whether there is any contravention with the Basic Law. That's a second level of consideration, which has to be considered separately from the issue of legal foundation. Whether there's going to be any contravention. Dr. Zhang mentioned Article 18. I thank Dr. Zhang for bringing to our attention the points we made in the written reply, and that is in accordance with case law. Well, when we read the Basic Law, we don't just do it literally. We have to look at the background and also some relevant materials. In the case of Ng Ka Ling and Chong Feng Yuen, and the document dated the 9th of March, we have set out all the relevant points. In considering the articles of the Basic Law, we should not adopt a literal approach, because we need to have regard to the purpose of Basic Law. So we have to look at the purpose of Article 18. Article 18 is in Chapter 2 of the Basic Law, and Chapter 2 is about the rights and obligation of Hong Kong SAR, and also the division of the boundary of powers and obligations. Article 18, if we try to understand why we need the Article 18, there are national laws such as those on foreign affairs and national defense, and those laws will not be applied to Hong Kong just because the CPG says so. This is the background of Chapter 2. This particular set out the powers conferred on Hong Kong and what powers are reserved by the CPG. And against this background, the objective and reasonable interpretation of Article 18, it points to the intention that the national laws cannot be applied generally in Hong Kong SAR. So when we talk about national laws in Article 18, this should be the background that we pay attention to. And all laws have to be considered in the light of the people to be applied and who are responsible for the enforcement. In Article 18, the national laws, mentioned there are laws that would generally apply to the entire Hong Kong SAR. So it's different. Those laws apply to the entire Hong Kong SAR, and those laws are applicable to all persons, including tourists. So the object of application is different. And the national laws mentioned in Article 18 the nature of the mainland laws mentioned in Article 18 is not the same as those Chinese laws applicable in the mainland port area of the station. First of all, the laws will not be applicable to the entire Hong Kong SAR, but just in the mainland port area. And the mainland port area is set up for a purpose. It's not something set up without any specific purpose. And that is, as I've said, to promote our economy, improve people's livelihood. We set up the MPA with clearly delineated boundaries. And also, the national laws mentioned in Article 18 will apply to all persons in Hong Kong. And this is different in the case of the mainland port area, where Chinese laws will apply to those people who want to use the XRL to go to and return to Hong Kong through such XRL service. These people have a choice of using Lo Wu or Sham Bay or some other boundary crossing facilities. But if Hong Kong people would like to use the XRL, then the Chinese laws will apply to them at the MPA, but not to other people outside the XRL station. And it's different from Article 18. The implementation of the Chinese laws at the MPA will be by the mainland authorities. So it's different from what Article 18 refers to. So as I've said last time, Article 18 is not engaged in the consideration of the current issues. All right, that's a very detailed response. 14 minutes is used. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, second round, 5 minutes. I would like the Secretary to tell us her understanding of the principle one country, two systems, and a high degree of autonomy. In answer to Dr. Fernando Cheung's question, she refers to certain examples. For example, if Hong Kong is to enact a law on minimum wage, of course you don't see anything in the basic law for this. We know this is a livelihood issue, and it's not in contravention of any article of the basic law. So it's just a normal procedure to have the law enacted by this council to implement the policy. But when we talk about the co-location, we are talking about the application of mainland laws to a location geographically within Hong Kong. So how can we maintain the integrity of our system within Hong Kong? Because at a location within Hong Kong, we don't apply Hong Kong laws. Instead, mainland laws will be applied. So that's tantamount to one country, one system. And second, Article 18 is very clear about this. And that is the Standing Committee of the MPC may add to or delete from the list of laws in Annex 3 after consulting its committee for the basic law of the Hong Kong SAR and the government of the Hong Kong region. Laws listed in Annex 3 to this law shall be confined to those relating to defense and foreign affairs, as well as other matters outside the limits of the autonomy of the region as specified by this law. And if there's anything that would affect the security of Hong Kong, that's the power. The CPG can issue an order to declare a state of emergency and apply national laws in the Hong Kong SAR. So it's very clear that there are certain circumstances, and only under those circumstances can national laws be applied or promulgations be made to apply national laws in Hong Kong SAR. But obviously, co-location arrangement is a livelihood matter. It's not national defense. It's not foreign affairs. We're not talking about social turmoil or state of war. So how can you trample on the principle one country, two system like that? And how can you make changes to that? And also, with regard to high degree of autonomy, if Hong Kong SAR cannot govern a piece of land, how can we have a high degree of autonomy? And you talk about promoting or providing convenience facilities, and the government can provide more, add to existing facilities. But if by doing this, it goes beyond the principle one country system and high degree of autonomy, then you can do whatever you want. Then that will mean the total demise of the principle one country system and our high degree of autonomy.
Secretary for Justice, thank you for the questions. Many, touch upon fundamental issues, so I may need a bit more time to answer the questions, Madam Chair and members. I ask for your forbearance. Now, first, on one country, two systems, high degree of autonomy, I will briefly respond to that because I'm sure you are very much familiar with the concept. Now, China is a sovereign state. Powers are derived from the central authorities. So we have the basic law to protect, to defend, safeguard the powers in Hong Kong. Now, we have, of course, the capitalist system in Hong Kong, while it's the socialist system in China. So in the basic law, there are three protections offered to us. First is our judicial independence. Second, we could continue to use the common law system. And third is that we have independent prosecutorial powers. These are the basic safeguards. Now, when we look at one high degree of autonomy from this context, then in Article 2 of the basic law, there is a discussion on high degree of autonomy. And also, Chapter 2 of the basic law also mentions a high degree of autonomy where there are some senses not involving foreign affairs. Yes, please continue, Secretary. So for matters entirely within Hong Kong, these could be decided upon by us. Now, on legislation such as minimum wage, of course, first we have to work on the policies because it's about a high degree of autonomy. As for the legislation of minimum wage, at the time some said that you could not affect my right to conduct business and so on. But actually for this piece of legislation or any other legislation, when the Legislative Council considered this legislation, is about striking a balance. That is, whether a certain policy should be implemented in Hong Kong through legislation. You might recall some at the time considered that the bill would have certain impact, but at the end, everyone did the right thing, and the legislation on the minimum wage was passed into law. Now, also, restrictions on smoking. Some have people have different views. Some claim say they have the right to smoke, but then the Legislative Council will consider all factors and then come to an appropriate decision. So these are matters certainly within the powers of this Council to consider. Now, under high degree of autonomy, and let's come back to the operation of the XRL. From the people's livelihood consideration, from the economic development consideration, Mr. Frank Chen has explained that in details. So, co-location arrangement is the best arrangement in terms of policy. But then, this cannot be done just by Hong Kong alone. We need to work with the relevant authorities of the mainland. We need to invite them to come to Hong Kong to set up a port area within Hong Kong. And of course, if they are to set up a port area within Hong Kong, that means they need to discuss with the Hong Kong SAR government on how this could be implemented. So they need to thrash out the details. And only after the discussions, we came to the conclusion that mainland laws, only then would mainland laws apply to Hong Kong. Now, of course, if members don't agree, then we won't have a co-location. And a member said that means that we'll never see the commissioning of the XRL. But then why is it that we believe this bill could be passed into law? It's because now members have expressed great concern about jurisdiction. You're worried that the mainland port area would then be under the jurisdiction of mainland courts. Actually, there is adjustment or the restriction, if you could put it that way, on this arrangement. So this adjustment is about actual arrangement between the Hong Kong and the mainland authorities, and perhaps the other two principal officials to explain further if necessary. Now, it's only after this agreement reached and the local legislation could be enacted. So the question is whether this policy should be implemented in Hong Kong. If we believe it should be, then we have to consider whether this bill may impose undue restriction on our powers, and whether it's need to make adjustment. If that's the case, we have to look at it point by point. Now, I think the SAR government's position has been made very clear. We believe the co-location arrangement means that there's the mainland port area where the mainland laws shall apply and mainland jurisdiction shall apply. For one country, for co-location arrangement, it's not just about defining a boundary. We're talking about a train going from point A to many other points, because we know once the XR is connected to the high-speed rail network on the mainland, there would be many points. So therefore, we're not talking about a specific boundary as such. That's why internationally there are many similar co-location arrangements. For example, for the UK, if you bought the train at St. Pancras, then you will go through the clearance procedures both for the UK side and the French side, and then you bought the train. And then there was discussion between the UK and the French government on the co-location arrangement. They reached an agreement, and then the UK enacted a piece of legislation. France also enacted a piece of legislation. So that's why I said last time, here we're not just talking about common law or case precedent. It's about the Legislative Council having a power to do this, so we could enjoy the co-location arrangement. So there is such a practice internationally. I quoted example of the UK-France arrangement. At the end of the day, it's about whether we have gone beyond Article 18. Now, I've taken up a lot of members' time just now to explain that. I hope you will just go back to what I said earlier. For Article 18, this is not about, it's not being engaged, it doesn't involve that. It's primarily about the cooperation arrangement, and within that, how we make a decision on the application of jurisdiction and so on. So this is exactly a manifestation of the high degree of autonomy. It's exactly because we have the high degree of autonomy, that's why we are able to do this. It's the same in other places. For example, the French and the UK government, they're able to arrive at a similar arrangement because of their separate jurisdictions. Mr. Frank Chan, do you have anything to add? Thank you, Madam Chair. Now we need to look at Article 18, but on top of that, there are many other articles in the Basic Law that grant the Hong Kong SAR a high degree of autonomy. Under the principle of one country, two systems, the Hong Kong SAR government enjoys a high degree of autonomy, and in accordance with the Basic Law, the Hong Kong SAR government may formulate suitable policies for entry and exit control and to promote investment, people's livelihood, and so on. So when it comes to implementing the co-location arrangement, the SAR government needs to have discussions with the mainland authorities. There's also need to sign a cooperation arrangement with the Guangdong provincial government, and only if this is approved, then we could proceed with other matters, and then we could then ensure that the implementation of co-location could be implemented in accordance with the law. Article 22(2) of the Basic Law states that all offices set up in the Hong Kong SAR by departments of the central government or by provinces, autonomous regions, or municipalities, and so on. There must be first consent of the government of the region and the approval of the Central People's Government. So, therefore, this is not against the Basic Law. That's why, apart from just focusing on a single article, I think this council could cast their sight wider, because the Basic Law covers many different articles and various areas. So if we look at the Basic Law as a whole, we may have more comprehensive understanding of the Basic Law. Thank you. Dr. Priscilla Leung, 6th round. So now, members said that the co-location arrangements is against the Basic Law. I studied the statement of the Bar Association. Well, there's always been this difference of opinions on the co-location, in that there are some in the legal profession who just look at the Basic Law from the point of view of the common law system. They have overlooked the fact that the Basic Law is within the constitutional setup of the mainland. Now, the Basic Law, of course, is the most superior laws of Hong Kong SAR, and there are many different features, and we should just look at the common law. Common law adopts the Little Road approach, and so because in Basic Law there's no mention of co-location, is not allowed. But actually, if you look at the continental law system, or you look at other countries that adopt statutory laws, you have to consider the history of development. So you won't find, say, a provision on co-location in the Constitution after 100 years or so. Now, the Basic Law was passed in 1997, so there won't be specific details on co-location and so on. And also, the Basic Law is not equivalent of just any constitution, because it's subordinate to the constitution of the mainland. And for the power of interpretation of the Basic Law, as you know, when it comes to the relationship between the Central People's Government and the SAR, and on the point of high degree of autonomy, there have been many differences of opinion. And then when it comes to the co-location arrangement, now Annex 3, you refer to Annex 3. We're not saying that it's not entirely right, but then we have studied this with many mainland experts. If we try to go through the route of Annex 3, now there are over 10 pieces of national laws in Annex 3, and national laws here that should apply to Hong Kong should apply to the whole of Hong Kong. So that's why you don't seem to have the full understanding that basic law and one country, two systems should be considered together. And you find this unacceptable because they cannot accept that the basic law and that it is actually endorsed by the National People's Congress rather than just any piece of legislation passed in Hong Kong. Now, I'm not going to repeat what the Secretary for Justice said. If you look at a common law system, even a continental law system, they would resort to such an approach. So, for that two governments could arrive at a co-location arrangement. So this is nothing unique for Hong Kong or the mainland. Now, the Bar Association claims that for the Shenzhen port area, then the mainland gives both criminal and civil jurisdiction to Hong Kong. That is acceptable, but it can't be done the other way around, and they keep harping about on Article 18. But if we want to interpret Article 18, we shouldn't just look at it from the point of view of Hong Kong. It's about the relationship between the CBG and Hong Kong. And the application of Article 18 is not like what they're doing. I just want to focus on Article 18, but rather we need to look at all relevant provisions and articles. The last point I'd like to make, I'm going to pursue this later actually. I think now, after the implementation of a co-location arrangement, which involves the cooperation of two jurisdictions at the boundary crossing. Well, what about in future? Say a criminal act that straddles two jurisdictions, how should it be dealt with? I think we should actually spend more time on such issues that we may face in future. And I want to say that I'm totally confident that what we're doing now, that is considering this piece of bill, is definitely in compliance with the basic law and the Constitution, and there is a sound legal basis for this. Thank you.
Secretary for Justice, civil and criminal jurisdiction. Have you started any study on this? And there are reserved matters, non-reserved matters in the bill. Maybe you can point out where we can find them, what falls under our jurisdiction, and what don't. I didn't quite catch the question. Maybe I can do this in the next round. I just make this point so that you can make good preparation. Are you going to seriously look into the cross-jurisdictional matters relating to, say, criminal acts, murder, and the like? After the co-location is implemented, and there's a Hong Kong residents who murdered someone in Taiwan. There's a recent case about that. I gave Dr. Zhang and Mr. Chen many more minutes than I said, so perhaps you can respond to Ms. Leung's question now. Reserved matters, non-reserved matters. Thank you, Ms. Leung, for clarifying your question. Well, we have to get the specifics before we can respond to matters of criminal acts. But I can talk about some principles, general principles here. In the bill, as the chairperson has pointed out, there are the reserved matters and non-reserved matters, which I won't repeat now. If there's a matter which can involve both sides, there are cases precedent cases on dealing with cross-jurisdictional issues. But of course, our views are different in the U.S. and in the U.K. But usually, we'll look at where the act takes place, and some would look at the consequence of the act. So we need to get the specifics before we can really respond. But ultimately, this is a question of conflict of law or choice of law that matter. And there are many principles that we need to consider. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Frank Chan talks about, a moment ago, Article 22. If there's a need for departments of the central government or provinces or autonomous regions or municipality directly under the central government to set up offices in Hong Kong SAR, they must obtain the consent of the government of this region and approval of the CPG. That's of course correct. The consent is required before they can set up offices. But I hope, Mr. Chen, you can look at the other paragraph just next to this. All offices set up in the Hong Kong SAR by departments of the central government or by provinces, autonomous regions, or municipalities done directly under the central government, and the personnel of these offices shall abide by the law of the region. So if the land is not carved out and given to the mainland, then they would have to abide by the laws of Hong Kong if they set up a port area. But unfortunately, under the co-location arrangement, these people will not be abide by the laws of Hong Kong SAR, but by mainland laws. So how can you say that this is not in violation or in contravention of the basic law? Secondly, I'm also worried by the reply. Although the Secretary for Justice spent more than 10 minutes in giving us an answer, he said that this is the best arrangement which would make it convenient for our people. That means that you can do this if it's providing an additional convenience, but that means also that we can give up the principle one country, two system for the sake of convenience. If we deduce, if we do this by extending to other areas, for example, we can extend national laws to Hong Kong. For example, the provocation laws, stirring up trouble, to stir up trouble, is applicable on the mainland. They deal with the civil rights lawyers like this. Are you going to extend this to Hong Kong if it's considered that it would benefit our society? So what would happen to our high degree of autonomy and the principle one country, two system? So if you say that if something can benefit Hong Kong, it can be applied in Hong Kong, would that be the situation we have to face in the future? I'm talking about two secretaries. The first, Mr. Frank Chang talks about one paragraph of the article, but not the other one. That's regrettable. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Leung Yu-chung. Thank you, Mr. Leung, with regard to your question. The Secretary for Justice would like to help me. She has got a very good answer to this. But it was Mr. Frank Chan, who quoted Article 22. But he said that he would like to ask the Secretary for Justice to help him. Well, he deliberately omitted one subparagraph when he quoted the article. Secretary for Justice. Well, actually, Mr. Frank Chan can is more than capable in answering this question. But I would like to say something before Mr. Chen talk about what is going to happen on the ground. Article 7 talks that the land is state property. So don't talk about ceding land to the mainland. Land is state property. We are now doing this through a lease so that mainland port area can be set up and operated. And actually, there's a written reply given to the question of Article 22, subparagraph 3, and that is the one referred to by Mr. Leung Yu-chung, which talk about Article 23, 2(3) talks about abiding by Hong Kong law. When you enact this bill, this becomes part of Hong Kong law, so they will be discharging their duties in accordance with a piece of legislation of Hong Kong. I think my previous comments have been misquoted, but I don't want to argue about that. But this co-location is needed by our society, and it is going to be implemented through the co-location arrangement. Whether it will be implemented is determined by whether this council approves the bill. So it doesn't mean that we can introduce other national laws in a similar manner in the future. We have a very good mechanism. Some policies have to be implemented through legislation, and some policies can be implemented without legislation. In this case, the arrangement can only be implemented through legislation. So we need to take on board all the relevant considerations before we can implement the co-location arrangements. I hope members can understand this point. I wonder if Mr. Chen would like to supplement now. Well, at the very beginning of the bill, we talk about the purpose is to declare an area of the West Kowloon section mainland port area, and to provide that the West Kowloon Station mainland port area is to be regarded as an area lying outside Hong Kong but lying within the mainland for certain purposes. You said you talk about abiding by Hong Kong law, but since after the law is enacted, it will be abiding by the law. And since the mainland port area is regarded as within the mainland, it's also very clear. Mr. Ray Chan, I hope the government will refrain from saying that the commissioning of XRL will be deferred indefinitely if we do not approve or enact the law. You are trying to shift the responsibility to this council. The government table dispute is not the result of the choice of the government. It was only done in July last year, and there's no backup or alternative option presented. You're not saying that if this is not passed, the commissioning will be deferred. We want to commission this in September, so you should do it by any means before summer break. And this is not fair to the chairperson. The chairperson has to chair the meeting fairly and objectively. She has no duty to work within the time frame presented by the government. We're talking about matters of major principles. You don't have to talk about Articles 118 and 119. No one will argue about the government being empowered to come up with measures to encourage investment and also the promotion of commerce, tourism, manufacturing, and so on. but we are talking about whether it's going to be in contravention. The arrangement is in contravention of Article 18. The Bar Association has issued a statement, and that is this council is not empowered to pass any law in contravention of the law. And it has pointed out clearly that this bill is going to be in contravention of the basic law. Secretary for Justice, you are also a barrister. Have we encountered any similar instances whereby after a blue bill is presented in this council, the Bar Association then points out that it's in contravention of the basic law, or it's very likely that once it's enacted, it will be in contravention of the basic law?
Secretary for Justice. I don't have any information at hand as to whether there were such cases. And second point is we want to understand something is not a question of whether there have been precedents. But rather, we have to look at the different statements, submissions, positions, and so on. We have to see whether the legal basis of such statements is right, and then we consider whether the points, those viewpoints are acceptable or not. So it's not a question whether there's been precedent. A precedent won't prove whether a viewpoint is right or not. Secretary, your duty is here to assist members in considering the bill. If some members believe the statement of the Bar Association carries weight or that is right, then you have to allay our concerns so we could make the right judgment. So please go back and do some homework. Now, see if when we considered bills in the past, was there ever an occasion that the Bar Association stated that the Legislative Council had no power to pass that bill because it's against the basic law? Okay, please go back and do the homework. Now, in our discussion here, Secretary for Justice, you brought in this concept of proportionality test. Why do we have to bring in this concept for this bill? If you are categorical that Article 18 does not apply in this case, then why do we need to introduce this concept of proportionality test? So we could confirm that this bill is feasible and is not against the basic law. Why do we need to do that? I think the Secretary has explained that in the past. Can I go back to the earlier point of Mr. Chen, Madam Chair? Yes, please do. Thank you. Now, I'm sure you have this understanding. So we are not trying to force this council to pass any law. We have great respect for this council. That's why the Department of Justice and the two Policy Bureau take the scrutiny of this bill very seriously. Now, maybe on certain details, in preparing for the meeting, we may not have got all the figures and so on, but we could always give you a written response after meeting. Secretary, anything else on the proportionality test? Anything to add? Well, I have to ask members to refer to our document dated the 9th of March. And I wonder if that may take up too much of your time if I repeat these points. Mr. Chan, can you please read that document first? Yeah, I've read it many times. I'm asking how come they have to bring in this concept this time. We've considered so many bills. I've never seen this done. So do we need to weigh a bill this way? Secretary, can you explain briefly why the proportionality test applies here? Well, the reason why we mentioned this point is because I think there was a question from a member, or as we tried to explain the law, this point was mentioned. Now, so how come we started the discussion on proportionality test? It's because sometimes when we consider a bill, the court may have this viewpoint, and so it's about the legal principle. So that's why we need to go back to consider, first of all, whether if we want to consider whether it's lawful or not, then I think on the point of people's livelihood, I don't think there's any contention on that. But as to whether this bill is related to this purpose, and I think again there's no contention. And then on the co-location arrangement, has it gone beyond what needs to be done to achieve the purpose of promoting people's livelihood? And I think I haven't heard any contention either. I believe there's no contention, because the two directors of bureau explained why there's a need to do so for security reasons and so on. And if there's still any doubt, I think the two directors could explain that further. So it's about ensuring there is no loophole in the security arrangement. And because there are some restrictions, and in other words, there's some adjustment, so that's why the court needs to strike a balance is between the overall interests of the community and the convenience of individuals. So it's about whether there is a proper balance, and if so, then it's in line with the relevant legal requirements. I've been liberal would say the time restrictions of 54321 is just a guideline. Let me finish, please. So there are 6 members in line, so I have to be stricter with time control. Mr. Yu Si-wing? If I recall correctly, I think it's this Tuesday. You're still talking about 54444. How come now it's become 54321? Can you please remind us when it's become 54321 now, and what do you have in mind? I understand you need to deal with bill. I see that you have adopted a relaxed approach, but I think it's best for us to have certain principles to go by. Then it's easy for everyone to follow. Ms. Chen, I mentioned 54321. I'm just using that as an example. You don't need to be so sensitive. The guiding principle remains that if questions are repeated too many times or are not relevant, then I will have to stop such questions. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Yu. You are also speaking for the 3rd time. Thank you. I'd like to thank the Transport and the MTRCL for arranging a visit. Yesterday there were 14 tourism groups which visited the West Kowloon station. We saw where the coach bus terminus or point was, and we see the other transfer arrangement, the retail and catering areas, and so on. And on the whole, we were happy about the overall design of the station. We believe when the station is opened to the public, it could meet the needs of different passengers. Next to the West Kowloon station, there is the Element as well as the West Kowloon Cultural District. So this station will be more than a station. It's probably where the public will go for leisure or for shopping and dining. So we hope the station will be open to the public as soon as possible, and then we could take the high-speed rail to the mainland. Last time, the Secretary for Security gave a response to members' questions. Now there are entry and exit points. There are exit doors for maintenance and repair staff. Let's say if a maintenance staff member breaks the law in Hong Kong and then he goes into mainland jurisdiction, then how do we deal with such cases? What would be the repatriation arrangement? Would there be any specific provisions to deal with that? So it's about jurisdiction again. Secretary for Security? Thank you. Mr. Xu for the question. So your question is, let's say a person, whether he's a staff member or just a member of the public, he breaks the law in mainland port area and then he comes through to Hong Kong. So he breaks the law in the mainland jurisdiction and then he comes back to the Hong Kong jurisdiction. Now, whether it's the co-location arrangement at the West Kowloon Station or whether it's at the Longwood Bridge, the dealing is the same. The way we deal with it is the same. When it comes to law enforcement, if it involves two jurisdictions, whether it happens at the West Kowloon Station or at any other boundary control points, or even if it's in the cyber world, we often come across such cases in law enforcement. So in answer to your question, Mr. Yu, if someone breaks the law on the mainland and he comes to Hong Kong, then we just regard him as someone who has broken the law outside of Hong Kong, and then he comes back to Hong Kong. If he breaks the law on the mainland, of course, in Hong Kong we cannot arrest him. But in our policing work, there are many mechanisms for us to curb to deal with cross-boundary law enforcement. Let's say if someone who steals something either in the mainland port area or in Guangzhou, and then he comes back to Hong Kong. In that case, we would assist the mainland authorities to deal with the theft case that has taken place on the mainland. So we will rely on existing mechanisms. So whether there is the mainland port area in the West Kowloon Station or not, it will not change the way we will deal with such crime. And we do deal with such crimes almost on a daily basis. And we will rely on existing mechanisms. But if it's mainland staff member, is he regarded a public officer or just a member of the public? Secretary? For public officers of the mainland port area, they cannot come through to Hong Kong. They cannot leave the mainland port area to enter Hong Kong. So therefore, that situation should not arise. Now, if it's Hong Kong officer carrying out his duties in the mainland port area and then he breaks the mainland laws, for example, he commits a theft or indecent assault, and then he comes back to Hong Kong, then we will still regard that as someone who has broken the law of jurisdiction outside of Hong Kong, and then he comes back to Hong Kong. So it's also about helping the other jurisdiction to deal with the case. Thank you. Next, Dr. Priscilla Leung, speaking for the third time. Let's say if someone takes the co-location arrangement for judicial review in court, then we need to consider the electoral approach, proportionality test, and so on that we were discussing. But before us here, I believe we have robust constitutional basis for this. It's because the MPC-SC has already made a clear decision to approve the cooperation arrangement. So whether it's the co-location arrangement and so on, it involves the Central People's Government. That's why it requires the approval of the MPC-SC. So it's about the section of the Basic Law that involves the relationship between the mainland and the Hong Kong SAR. That's why I believe the MPC-SC decision is an adequate constitutional basis. So if you have to keep repeating that you don't accept that, well, I think it's because there was this difference of opinions from the start of the Hong Kong SAR establishment. But then you must not overlook the source of the constitutional basis and so on. Now, there has been, there have been many discussions among the legal professionals on such matters, and there's a difference of opinion. I don't think what you're doing now would help the case in any way, but rather I'd like you to help in this respect. I have a question for the government now. I've asked it before, just now. Now for the Longwu, BCP, Huanggang, and others, have there been many controversies, let's say, or disputes? Let's say someone who committed drug trafficking on mainland that comes to Hong Kong. There are many such cases, and how do you deal with these cases? Because you've dealt with similar cases. The Cheung Choo Keung case, the Telford Garden case, these were controversial cases involving the two jurisdictions. They didn't arise because of the co-location arrangement, for instance. Now, were there many such cases? Because I've never seen much controversy about such cross-boundary crime cases. Secretary for Security. Thank you, Madam Chair and Dr. Leung. The Laurel Bridge is a good example. In our day-to-day operation, there are, from time to time, cross-boundary criminal acts, or say a drug trafficker moves from one jurisdiction to the other through a boundary crossing point. So your example is a good one. Let's say someone traffics in drugs, then at the point of origin, that's already a commission of crime, and then if the person then comes to Hong Kong, of course, he's also breaking the law here. So there has been little contention about such cases. Now, Dr. Leung referred to Cheung Choo Keung case. It's a rather an isolated case, but in most cases, there's no contention. So in terms of actual implementation and so on, there's great consensus. First is about where the crime is discovered, and then it's to be dealt with by the relevant jurisdiction. And if there's commission of crime in both jurisdictions, then first is for the jurisdiction in which the person is arrested to deal with it first. And if, say, the crime is of a serious nature, then it also involves Hong Kong, then it's for the two jurisdictions to consider how they could deal with the priorities of the case in line with legal principles. But these are rare cases. But in general, it's where the crime is discovered, that is for that jurisdiction to deal with it. And it's nothing new. It happens at boundary crossings, and it's the same in the cyber world. If there's a crime committed, then it's about involving different jurisdictions, and it happens almost on a daily basis.
Mr. Dennis Kwok, Secretary for Justice, I heard you talk about the proportionality test. The more I hear, the more chaotic it becomes. It seems as if that there are certain articles in the Basic Law, for example, Article 18, is just not there, as if it's not there. There are absolute provisions which cannot be subject to proportionality test. For example, Article 1, the Hong Kong SAR is an inalienable part of the PRC. Can you apply the proportionality test and say we can infringe it to a certain degree? No. And also, Article 18 says that national laws of the PRC can only be applied in Hong Kong SAR under certain circumstances. This is not subject to proportionality test. Last time I asked you about case law. In other jurisdictions, common law jurisdictions, you drew a blank. And now that we ask about the proportionality test, you make it even more messy. It seems that you can violate. You seem to suggest that you can violate these articles in the Basic Law by applying the proportionality test. So, what other articles of the Basic Law can be contravened through the application of the proportionality test? What about Article 1? Well, Mr. Kwok was not here when we talk about this. Is about the same question when it was raised by another member. So maybe I should repeat this answer. We have to separate the two issues. Proportionality test is one, and Article 18 another matter. Is another matter. And that is we talk about whether the certain restrictions can be applied. So we need to consider proportionality test. This bill, we do not engage Article 18. As we have explained both orally and in writing, then we talk about the meaning or the scope of national laws in Article 18, and also the national laws to be applied in the mainland port area. They are different. So that's why I said Article 18 is not engaged. I just don't understand how Article 18 is not engaged. You are trying to implement national laws in Hong Kong. Article 18 is precisely on this point. How can this article not be engaged? Please don't interrupt my question. How is it that Article 18 is not engaged? Well, we have said this time and again. Maybe I should repeat it so that we all understand why. The legislative intent of Article 18 is to restrict the application, restrict the general application of national laws in the Hong Kong SAR so as not to affect our high degree of autonomy and our legal system. So this is different from the application of mainland laws in the mainland port area of the XRL station. First is the geographical application. You have repeated this answer many times. Well, she has failed to explain why Article 18 is not applicable. You cannot say that he has repeated the answer many times, and like as if he's a tape recorder playing back some message. But she has failed to answer why Article 18 is not applicable. Well, some may think that she has explained the matter, but of course someone would disagree. Well, why do we have to apply the proportionality test? The Secretary of Justice is saying that Article 18 is not applicable. Therefore, we have to look at other articles. Let's just presume that this is the case. Can we talk about a more general constitutional point? If proportionality test can be applied to the basic law, then what articles are subject to the test? And what about others? I believe Article 1 is not subject to the proportionality test. What other articles are subject to this test then? Well, this is a very wide question. Why did we have to talk about the proportionality test? Because we're talking about the jurisdiction. When we adjust the jurisdiction or the scope of applicable laws through the cooperation agreement between Hong Kong SAR and mainland authorities, we have come up with the arrangement, and this is for the purpose of implementing the policy of co-location, which is a policy on people's livelihood and economic development. So under this background, we have made certain restrictions to the jurisdictions with regard to the mainland port area. So people will have to consider whether the adjustment to the jurisdiction is reasonable, and that's why we have to consider the proportionality test. So in other words, you are saying that all the articles in the basic law can be subject to the proportionality test, or in any future cooperation with the mainland, which may go beyond the co-location arrangement. So as long as it's about people's livelihood or economic development, then we can apply the proportionality test to other cases. Is that what the Secretary for Justice is suggesting? No, that's not what I'm saying. I think Mr. Yang has misquoted my answer. The proportionality test is to be considered when there are certain adjustments to jurisdiction power under the co-location arrangement. And he said that he presumed Article 18 is not applicable. That's why in my reply I also based my answer on that assumption. Well, I was saying that if the assumption, the presumption is accepted, what other articles are subject to the test? And also under clause 6, the reserved matters and non-reserved matters are delineated under the cooperation arrangement. What if there are other changes, future changes in the reserved matters and non-reserved matters? Then the legal foundation can be changed. Can you provide certainty? Because in a society with rule of law, we should have consistency and certainty. The boundary between reserved matters and non-reserved matters may change over time. Can there be other ways to ensure certainty? Secretary for Transport and Housing, there are articles in the cooperation arrangement providing for this scenario. Article 18, if there are changes to the operation of the West Kowloon XRL station, or there's a need to amend the arrangement, then there's a need to negotiate between the two sides and sign a document to signify the agreement for the CPG to endorse. And of course, if there's anything that would affect Hong Kong laws, then this council would also be involved. Mr. Jeremy Tan, I don't just understand how you can choose certain basic law articles and subject them to proportionality tests. Who can make the decision as regards which articles can be subject to the test? Secretary for Justice? Madam Chair, I've already stated that the proportionality test is not related to Article 18 because the discussion with and the answer given to Mr. Young is based on the assumption that, or presumption, that Article 18 is not applicable. All right? Even if Article 18 is not a related issue, who decided that this time Article 18 can be subject to the proportionality test? Hong Kong SAR or Beijing? Proportionality test is a legal principle. So there's no question of who can decide where to use it. We can all refer to this legal principle in considering matters. But there must be someone who suggests that this is the principle to be considered. You didn't mention this in July last year. Secretary for Justice, proportionality test is some legal principles as indicated by the judgments, court judgments. We didn't go into that kind of detail previously, but now we are scrutinizing a bill, and some people may be interested in details. Maybe the two secretary would like to supplement. No? Mr. Tam, you can ask your follow-up question now. Let me change the subject. Let's say there's a motor driver. The driver of the train is a Hong Kong employee. I mean the XRL train. Is the driver a Hong Kong employee? for short-haul train compartments procured by Hong Kong. The driver is a Hong Kong person. So every time when he leaves the Hong Kong side, what about his safeguarding his labor rights? Because he is almost working daily on the mainland side. In the cooperation agreement and in the draft, in the bill, we have certain stipulations concerning the rights and benefits of the employees and also taxation matters. They will be done in accordance with Hong Kong law. And we have certain reserve matters set out in the bill. Formulated in accordance with the cooperation agreement. So the person may be in the mainland, but he's protected by Hong Kong labor laws. Is it part of the reserve matter? Well, because the bill talks about whatever happens in the West Kowloon XRL station. But when the person is in the mainland, it's a different matter. You're only talking about the West Kowloon station. But for that particular employee, he works in the mainland. So would he be subject to Hong Kong labor laws or mainland laws? Mr. Tam, you can read the reserve matters and gain a deeper understanding.
Mr. Roy Kong. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this discussion has led into the mindset of Teresa Jiang. Members actually ask straightforward questions. For example, who made the decision and so on. Now, in the past, it's all roads lead to Rome, but now it's all roads lead to the XRL. The Bar Association has made it clear about Article 11 as a contravention of that. So if we consider this bill and it's really against the basic law, then we're being irresponsible. So how do you respond to the Bar Association statement? Now, if you continue to consider this bill, then in accordance with Article 11, we shouldn't actually be discussing the bill, but we're doing it now. So what is your view on that? Well, the Secretary has answered that question many, many times. So please repeat your answer. Perhaps Mr. Kong was not here, so he didn't hear your answer. Well, this bill has its own legal basis. When members consider this bill, of course, one important task is to refer to Article 11, that is, any laws shall not be in contravention with the basic law. So that's one task you need to perform. We're making sure that's the case. And we try to explain here there is no contravention with basic law. That's why members could continue to consider all the details of the bill and then decide whether you will pass the bill. Well, the Secretary thinks there's no contravention, but we on this side believe there is a major contravention. The UK government published the latest half-year report on Hong Kong, and there's mention of co-location. So what's your view on that? Secretary, I have not yet studied that report in detail. I just flipped through it, and I think it's just about reporting. The report doesn't form its own view. It just records what people have said. The other principal officials, please, anything to add? Thank you, Madam Chair. That report is about statement of facts. There's no formulation of opinions. So the Secretary was right. I just say that if we make any changes in the future, we must respect the spirit of the law in the that's all. So that report is just to list out what's happening in Hong Kong. Well, Secretary, you are involved in co-location legislative work, so you should have read the report, right? Well, actually, she's just being modest, that as if she tried to give the impression that she hasn't studied in detail, but she's read it just as I have. So, Secretary, you don't need to defend her. We're just saying that this is an international report, and it states clear, in detail there's mention of one co-location. Now, if you are so concerned about the co-location, so you should have read the report, right? That's just a straightforward question. I said just now that I have briefly read the relevant paragraphs. In my understanding is in that UK report, it's just about reporting who has said what, and it has not formed an opinion as to who is right and who is wrong. So when I read the report briefly, that's what I observed. Mr. Chen has also explained that. Now, I think it's strange for us to comment on others' comments, but I think rather when we give our comments, it's based on the legal basis and facts. Yes, the Secretary is right. This is not court ruling, so there's no question, no judgment of who's right or who's wrong. But at least it should inspire us in some ways. There's this term that pressure is building up. So if you read the report, you should have noted that. You know, the high degree of autonomy is the pressure building up on that. Secretary, well, Hong Kong is not at all under pressure when it comes to high degree of autonomy, not at all. And co-location is exactly a full high level of manifestation of high degree of autonomy. Dr. Jen Chung Tai. Now, whether members are in a position to consider a bill that may be unconstitutional, I think we've discussed that before. There was a recent report, and the administration also gave a response that at the West Coast station there are hidden doors. At the beginning it said there are some 50 hidden doors, but now it said that there are over 200 such hidden doors or concealed doors. And then the government saying that these are means of escape. So my question is, say in the mainland port area we have co-location, and there's enforcement of the laws and this restriction. What about the fire safety legislation? How is that to be dealt with? The government mentioned these are concealed doors, and they say these are means of escape. What about B2, B3, the mainland port area? Do they comply with our fire safety legislation, or do they comply with the fire safety laws of the People's Republic of China? Now, I'm sure the government is dealing with such matters. Otherwise, when we consider the details of this bill, definitely we have to come across such issues as implementation and so on. So for the mainland port area, do they have to comply with the fire safety legislation of Hong Kong? Officials, maybe you should quote the blue bill. The answer is in the details of the bill. Mr. Lee, please. Dr. Zhang, if you have studied the bill carefully, you would have noticed that in Schedule 1, page C546 in the Chinese version, or 547, it stated here, Article 7.2, that's a mention of construction and related facilities, including fire safety matters. This are reserved matters. So that's why there is need to comply with the laws of Hong Kong. Why is the bill worded this way? Because for construction and structures and facilities, well, as Dr. Chang has mentioned it too, when you build a building, you don't build half of it. We're talking about building the entire building. So for all the structures and related facilities in the buildings, they are the responsibility of Hong Kong. That's why in designing the co-location arrangement, this becomes a reserved matter. That means Hong Kong laws apply. Yes, I know there is such a description in the bill for the time being. But what legal powers do we have to include certain issues as reserved matters? For example, fire safety that I just mentioned. This council, do we have the power to amend reserved matters? Or is it the case for the reserved matters is result of discussion between the Hong Kong SAR government and the mainland authorities? So how do you include these reserved matters as exception? I think again we need to look at the detailed provisions. Well, I'll give a brief response and I'll see if Mr. Chen has anything to add. Now, of course, it is within the powers of this council to scrutinize the bill. If this bill is passed, then it becomes the law of Hong Kong. For laws enacted in Hong Kong, then means in Article 7(2) of Schedule 1 of the law, this provision has legal effect. So we could therefore exercise our powers under this Article 7(2) to deal with fire safety and other facilities. Well, let's please explain again when we come to the reference clause, so we could consider what's reserved and what's not reserved matters. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, speaking for the fourth time. Now, the Secretary referred to the decision of the MPCSC. The decision is about endorsing the cooperation arrangement. And then the Secretary quoted much from the explanations made by Mr. Zhang Xiaoming, but these explanations are not included as part of the decision. So that's why we have to ask the Secretary this question often. Article 18, whether there is any impact on Article 18, and the Secretary of Justice said many times that for Article 18, your view is that it does not engage, it does not apply. I think that's based on the explanations of the decision. We know that for many of the provisions in the basic law, maybe they have to view that differently. The common law interpretation is, of course, our tradition, but then the secretaries suggested that we should also look at this from the point of view of China, especially in relation to the relationship between the mainland and Hong Kong. So let me continue with my questions. So, Secretary, do you believe that the explanations made by Mr. Zhang Xiaoming amount to an interpretation of the law? Is that the case? If not, then when we consider this bill, we face this situation. Government officials hold a certain view, but members of this council may have a different view. And that would bring us to Article 11 of the Basic Law. That is, this council shall not pass a law that contravenes the Basic Law. So, let's say in the MPCSC decision, the content of it is derived from the interpretation of the law, then our position is clear. But if it's not the case, then we may face a scenario of Article 11, that is, it could be a contravention of the Basic Law. Secretary for Justice. Well, Mr. Wu asked a question last time. I'm grateful for the opportunity to explain it again. First, decisions and explanations are, in this case, they are product of the mainland laws. the definition of explanations under the mainland law system is something to help you understand the law, so that it should be read together with the law. I think I explained that last time. As for the decision, is in accordance with the constitution of the mainland and the laws of the mainland in relation to the lawmaking process and so on. So that's how the decisions came about. Now, you said interpretation of the law. Do you mean interpretation of basic law? Yes, of course. Okay, so there is no reference to Article 158 of the Basic Law. You can tell from the decision and explanations. Rather, it is in accordance with the Chinese Constitution. That's why, and that's the basis for endorsing the cooperation arrangement and for allowing mainland officials to be sent to the mainland port area for carrying out their duties. So you need to understand this background. So if you can see, this is a product under the mainland law legal system, so it's part of the mainland laws. And then from the Chinese legal point of view, this is an important document as a decision. Member asked about NPC and expressed concern. Yes, we have to accept, we have to recognize the NPC as the highest organ for making and amending laws. And also, in the context of the basic law, the NPC has the final power of interpretation, and we can see that in accordance with the law. So I may have repeated what I said last time. Yes, you have already, gone beyond the time limit. Others are waiting, so please be brief.
Well, you have misunderstood my point. If the decision itself also covers the explanation, then it's clear. You have explained the power. The explanation is not part of the decision. That's the point. Let me try to respond. I'm no expert of Chinese law, but we need to understand what Chinese law is about in this context. The decision is a legal instrument because it carries certain legal effects. And the explanation, according to Chinese law, facilitates the understanding of the decision. It sets out the background and the rationale of that decision. So if you read the explanation, you will be in a better position to understand the decisions in certain, and how certain declaration is to be understood. According to Chinese law, the explanation offers you the legislative intent and the background of the decision. I haven't asked any question. It's my wrong. In the recent judgment, in the Chen Houting case, the judge also gave some explanation as to how this should be understood. Maybe next time you can share with us the judgment. Mr. Kenneth Leung, for the fourth round, C546 or 546 in the Chinese version, reserve matters for which a jurisdiction is reserved. My question is about, well, jurisdiction is different about geographical application. If someone signed a contract in the mainland port area with another party, if a company convenes a directors meeting or or a board of directors meeting at the port mainland area, if you say this is outside the territorial base of Hong Kong, so the contractor enter into at that location, or the meeting convened at that location, will be something that happens outside Hong Kong. When this is passed, if a company says, I want to convene a meeting there because that's outside Hong Kong, it takes you 10 minutes and I can return immediately. So would our tax revenue be lost? You have only provide reserve matters for employees' tax liabilities. What about Hong Kong's tax revenue? Why is it that you are the one answering this question? I want the Secretary for Justice. We're talking about Article 7 in the C546, but I'm raising a legal question. It's C546 of the Blue Bill. For reserve matter and non-reserve matter is delineated under the cooperation agreement in the light of actual operational needs. And in order to live up to the spirit of the rule of law, and we need to do this in this bill, and that's why we need to come here to consult you and get the approval and endorsement of this council. Secretary, would you like to? Secretary for Justice, would you like to supplement? Nothing to add. I ask a very specific question. If there's a board of directors meeting convened at the mainland port area, is a meeting conducted outside Hong Kong, would that lead to loss of tax revenue? And you haven't answered this question. May I suggest that if they have not been able to answer this question, we've reserved this question for the cross-by-cross stage. Mr. Chi Hoi-Tik, fourth round. I want to pursue the past question for which no answer has been given. We have to first delineate the jurisdictional boundary. When can we go to the XRL station to take a look at the boundary so that we can understand what where the line is drawn? And it's said by the government that there will be a restricted area for transiting passengers under the MTR bylaws. And it said that the MTR bylaws will be applicable. And you know that for XRL train service, you have to buy a ticket under your own name. There will be checking of the train ticket. And then that would involve checking the ID as well. Under bylaw 42 of the MTR bylaws, if you want to check a person's ID, then there's a requirement that the person is suspected of violating the MTR bylaws. So is there a need to amend this bylaw if we are to do this at the XRL station? And also, under the MTR bylaws, there are certain definitions of railway premises, including the definition of the premises would include the station and the train compartment. But in the XRL stations, the train compartments is regarded as mainland premises, and there are certain excluded area at the area. would there be a need to have some consequential amendments made to the railway ordinance or bylaws? Secretary for Transport and Housing. Mr. Chi is, I think, very committed to the scrutiny of this bill. Earlier on, Mr. Chi gave us a list of questions, 4 pages altogether. These questions are very technical, requiring a lot of details to be considered. My colleagues are working on those questions. To facilitate the discussion of this council, I would suggest that we wait until we give a written document to this council first. The question is a very straightforward one. Do we need to have certain consequential amendments before the commissioning of the XRL? Mr. Chi has provided the answer. If it's outside the mainland port area, there's no need to amend the law, because we're talking about part of Hong Kong. And I was talking about giving new power to MTR staff, for example, because the ticket would carry the passenger's name, and there's the need to give MTR staff power to check ID. I've already said that we should provide all the replies to those questions to facilitate our discussion. Last time I had a question about Shek Kong, the depot, the sidings. And the Secretary for Security said that that's within Hong Kong, and also Shek Kong depot is governed by the MTR bylaws. It's a restricted area. It's easier to understand if you use the English term. There are 2 ways, as I said: closed area and restricted area. For there are also crossing restricted area for boundary crossings. All these are defined under Hong Kong law. If there's any contravention, a fine can be imposed, and sometimes imprisonment. So it's consistent for the closed areas. Who would manage the restricted area? Please repeat. Who managed this restricted area? Restricted area is a Hong Kong law concept. Of course, it's managed by Hong Kong. Under the current arrangement, it would be done by the XRL company. You mean the MTRC? Yes, MTRC. This is not a closed area. Say if a person carries 20 cans of baby formula in the closed area, is that person going to violate the restriction, the law on the restriction of baby formula, the egg? When a person has too many cans of baby formula, we're talking about people going out from Hong Kong. If that person remains on Hong Kong land, there's no violation. If the Sekong stapling sidings, you have misunderstood my question. If someone, let's say an MTR staff, and we're not talking about explosive or or arms, which would be a contravention of the law and at any place. But if you have 10 bags of diamonds on a street in Hong Kong, there's no violation of the law. But in Shek-Kong, if someone does that, there's a possibility of smuggling. And does it mean that you cannot prosecute that person, but the person can gain access, can touch the train compartment? If smuggled goods are put on the compartment, and the next day the train would go to West Kowloon, I don't know whether there will be a security check, or if it's concealed carefully, you may not be able to find out the concealed goods. And then at West Kowloon, it's in the mainland port area. The goods can be retrieved. If there's another clearance procedure, then you may be able to detect such behavior. But if it's a closed area, then as long as someone takes something like that into the area, he can be arrested. But as I've said, it's not a crime to carry 10 bags of diamond, for example, and walk on the street of Hong Kong. Well, let's look at the elements of the act involved. If some contraband goods, baby formula or whatever, if such goods are brought into the area and there's the intention to leave Hong Kong, please extend the meeting for 15 minutes. Yes, I can extend the meeting by 15 minutes, but I don't want to spend all the 15 minutes because there's another meeting to follow. If the things are already placed in the compartment and there's the necessary intention, of course, he's caught. But when the person is in the area, but he has not yet put the goods into the compartment, what's wrong with the 10 bags of diamonds with me? I just want to play with the diamonds as if they are marbles. So I'm talking about taking such things into Shek-Kong does not entail any action. Let's get an answer from the secretary. Your understanding is wrong. If I know that the intention, let's say I have a CCTV footage or I have a selfie photo, it would be sufficient to carry our prosecution.
I'm saying that before he put it there, I think for such cases we should discuss them when we go to the clause by clause. That would be the best. Okay, it's now 10:33. At 10:45 there's another panel. So I have to end the questions and answers session today because I need to deal with other matters. First, date of next meeting, which is tomorrow, is the public hearing. Then there are 160 individuals or deputations coming to give their views. So there are 4 sessions. There will be breaks in between. So members, please come on time. Now, because there are so many who wish to give their view, so on the 7th of April, Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., we will have another public hearing. So there are 2 public hearings. Members, please note that in your diary. The next public hearing is on the 7th of April, Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. So please look out for the meeting notice from the Secretariat. Now, if I may say this to members, let me finish, please. Miss Chen, let me finish. Let me finish, please. Wait, please. Now, many members have asked questions about tax revenue, criminal jurisdiction, fire safety. They all involve the clauses. So after the public hearing, please bring along the blue bill. We will go into the clause-by-clause scrutiny of the bill. Madam Chair, I have a question. Yes, please, Ms. Chen. First of all, at the Tuesday meeting, only 40 members will have seats for the public hearing. So for this Saturday's public hearing, what is the seating arrangement for members? That's the first question. Secondly, I am sure many members still would like to ask about more details on the constitutional basis, including Article 19 of the Basic Law. Then there could be restriction on the final adjudication powers of the courts. We haven't even started the discussion. So what is your basis, Madam Chair, that we could start clause-by-clause scrutiny? And then Article 19 of the Basic Law won't be in the clause-by-clause scrutiny, but then in the Bar Association submission it stated solemnly there is a problem there. So what is the basis of that decision? Now, just today, is it just because today there are a few members who ask questions that may touch upon the bill provisions? That's why you wanted to start clause-by-clause scrutiny? Can you explain that, please? On the seating arrangement for tomorrow's public hearing, can I ask the clerk to explain that? Ms. Chen has asked a question, so I have to give her an answer. Clerk, please. For tomorrow's public hearing, 62 seats have been reserved for members, and there are about 40 seats for deputations. So we have 60 members in this Bills Committee, so there should be enough seats. The second question of Ms. Chen about Article 19. I believe we proceed to clause-by-clause scrutiny that will help in answering members' questions. Now, you could still continue to ask questions on policy issues when we go consider the bill clause-by-clause. Yes, Ms. Caldemo, please. I don't agree with you, Madam Chair, that we should start clause-by-clause scrutiny at the next regular meeting, because before us, you see the screen, my name is there, I still have questions. And that's not the same as what you describe about clause-by-clause scrutiny. And then there are 3 members, including myself, who haven't finished asking questions, and you won't allow us to continue with our questions, and then you just decide next time when we come back it will be clause-by-clause scrutiny, and you ask members to bring along the blue bill. Really? That's not the way for a chairperson to act. You're being too arbitrary. I heard your views. Well, this is the Bills Committee to consider a bill, and actually members should have brought along the bill at every meeting. I'm just saying that if we proceed to clause-by-clause scrutiny, that will help you to understand the bill. And if there are policy issues, even if they have not been raised before, you could raise them then. Yes, next, who's after Ms. Claudimo, please? Is it Mr. Eddie Chu? I think it's Mr. Ray Chen. I think he raised his hands first. And I thought it was Mr. Dennis Kwok because, you know, there was a bit of confusion there. Anyway, okay, Mr. Chen first. Madam Chair, can I ask you to clarify this? You asked us to bring along the blue bill. Actually, we bring it along every time. So you're saying that next time we will proceed directly to clause-by-clause scrutiny, or will you still allow some time to ask broader questions, say on the basic law, before we go to clause-by-clause? Can you be more specific? I can just repeat the principle that for repeated or irrelevant questions, they should not be asked. So you allow a round of questions, new questions, before we go to clause-by-clause scrutiny? Well, actually, yesterday we received many questions from members. The administration will be giving detailed reply. No, exactly, because the administration gives reply, then we will need to consider it. Please let me speak. Please observe order. Last evening we received a few submissions. One was a submission on Braille. It's in Braille, actually, that submission. So the Secretariat has to arrange for someone to translate the Braille into words, so that takes a bit of time. So we could collect all members' questions, but they could still continue with questions. But I think to assist us in considering the bill, I think starting from the next meeting, we should start looking at the bill. Next, Mr. Dennis Kwok. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Madam Chair, just now many members asked many questions. The Secretary for Justice last time talked about proportionality test, and then when we asked her more about it, now today she's saying something new, that the Article 18 doesn't engage. So you can't blame us for asking more questions, because every time we ask questions, maybe then he'll change her position. And then Article 19, subparagraph 2 on jurisdiction. Well, that's something we need to discuss in detail. These are matters of principles. If we don't sort out the principles and then we just rush into clause-by-clause scrutiny, what is the point? If they could explain things clearly, it will facilitate clause-by-clause scrutiny. On matters of principles, when we consider go to the clause-by-clause scrutiny, we could still take those up. Who's next, please? Yes, Mr. Eddie Chu. Madam Chair, can you be more specific? Okay, let's say we move to clause-by-clause scrutiny. So are you saying that we could only raise questions of on policies on a particular clause? Let's say if we haven't finished 544, and we probably even the 544 speaking rounds, you haven't even finished that, then you won't allow us. Then you want to go to, you won't allow us to finish, and you want to go to scrutiny, right? So that's against your 54444. As I said, 54444 is just a guideline, and when I enforce it, being very liberal, as I said before. And then when we go to clause-by-clause scrutiny, it will still involve the various principles, and we could raise the questions then. So can you clarify, Madam Chair? Let's say I'm on clause 4 of part 2, the declaration of the mainland port area at the West Kowloon station, and maybe on that clause I have questions on policies which I have not asked before, or like what I asked just now, whether there's need to amend the MTR bylaws, and how do you judge at a time? That is, this is outside clause 4, so you can't ask the questions. Would that be the case? As the Secretaries for Transport pointed out, I have dozens of questions. And these are all relevant questions on how we operate the XRL. So we haven't even finished those questions while we're moving on to something else. Well, last night, all of a sudden, we received 3 submissions, right? Many submissions, not counting the Braille submission. We are now doing translation to Braille submission. And last night, we also passed on these submissions to the administration. They need time to come up with a response. But when the government is ready with response, you could always ask follow-up questions. When we go to clause-by-clause scrutiny, if there are new questions or questions of principles that have not been addressed, you could still raise them. Who's in the queue, please? We have to be fair. We can't let a member dominate the floor. Dr. K.K. Kwok, he hasn't asked questions. It will be the last. He'll be the last one because time is up. Madam Chair, I don't know if you're receiving instructions that you need to do certain things in this Bills Committee. Now, I wasn't able to come down earlier to ask questions, but I heard the officials were giving ambiguous replies. Sometimes it's about proportionality, sometimes about engagement or not. So for Article 18, I think that's outrageous. Now, even if you received order to do something, you mustn't do it like this. This will damage your image, because in the past you have been relatively fair. So you shouldn't be so blatant here. Shouldn't you allow members to ask all questions on policies first? There's plenty of time. We can have many more meetings if you want, until we sort out all the issues. Can you clarify that, please? Now, I have not received any instructions, and I've tried to schedule meetings as far as possible. But then there was a member who told me in the elevator that he could, he would fall out with me any time, and I was unsettled hearing that. But anyway, as a chairperson, I will still go by the rules in conducting meetings. This time, meeting adjourned.